Well, hello guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to the build of the Skymaster A10. I almost said F-18, but it's not an F-18, it's clearly an A10. Alright guys, in this episode we will be putting the nose of the aircraft on the rear part of the fuselage. Previous video we got the tanks installed, we got the startup plate installed, the midsection, if you want to call it that, is complete on the aircraft. And we are now moving forward into the front portion of the aircraft. So lots will get covered in this episode. Hopefully you guys enjoy everything we're covering in the previous videos and in this video. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. And thank you guys in the last video for all the suggestions on the fundraising ideas for the new shop. I appreciate it. Not 100% sure yet exactly what we're going to do, but working on it. So hang tight guys, and we will get into this build of the A10. Alright guys, so if you missed the last video, where we left off is we got the tanks installed. We've got all of our lines and everything run that need to go forward. So we need to put a little bit of material on the tanks to fasten it in place, so we can either use some goop or some silicone just on the sides there to hold the tanks from moving. And next thing we need to do is finish the vent fittings. So basically on most of my, well, on all my builds, unless somebody wants something else, I use these DreamWorks high flow vent fittings. The taxi tank just plugs right into that, and it is nice and simple, works really well, great system. So that's what we're going to be using on this aircraft. Now we could just put those tank fittings into the bottom of the fuselage. One of the downsides with doing that is generally the fuselages are not super strong, so you've got a fairly small area that if you have an impact or something, or kind of hit it the wrong way, you can crack the fuselage. So what I like to do in this case is just take some thin plywood. This is probably 3/32, I believe, something like that, maybe 1/8, and just cut a square. Doesn't have to be overly big, so I'll probably cut a piece this long, cut it in half, and then we're going to put our vent pieces on that. And this just helps to spread out the load. So I'll drill my holes through this. I will glue the plywood piece onto the fuselage when we clamp these all together. It's a great system, works really well, and just helps to make sure that that doesn't cause the fuselage any damage. So I'm just going to cut these pieces out, get them lined up, and I'll show you guys the process. Alright guys, so there's one of the two holes in the fuselage, the other one's right there. So those are sized a little bit bigger than this guy. So that's what I'm talking about here with what we're doing. So we're going to put this piece through the bottom of the fuselage. The wood piece goes over top, like that. And then we thread that down, and we've got a nice tight, wide fastening point. And then in between the fuselage and the piece of wood, I'll just put some 5-minute epoxy, and that helps strengthen everything up. So I'm going to get those installed, and then we need to plumb the tanks to the vent fittings. Alright, so both vent fittings are installed, and those are ready to go. Now what we're doing is we're just taking some white silicone, or whatever we've got in the shop. We're just going to take some of it and probably put it kind of on the top part of the tank right there, where it sits against the wood former, and probably a little bit on the underside right there as well. Alright guys, so we've got a little bit of silicone up top there, on top of the tanks, also some down below. And we've run the vent lines here as well to the vent fitting. So this is the larger size Tygon, the large diameter, I'm not sure what size it is. Fits over top of the vent fittings, the high flow vent fittings, and it fits over top of the brass tube, a little bit loose. Still snug fit, but it's not like pushing it over a barb. So because of that, we will use a piece of tie wire on each one, doing a double wrap like always. And when that is complete, the fuel system for the tank portion is done. All right, so in preparation to join the fuselage together, we do have these two things. We shall just call them fins, which go right there. So they join also the rear and the front fuselage. They're not structural at all. They're very, very thin. But the manual doesn't tell you anything on how to install these things. It looks like there's just some threaded wood in there. It goes through the little wood piece inside the fuselage. And here's all the fasteners that we have left. So basically the only fasteners that we really have left are either those guys right there, and there's only one of them, and that's way too long. We've got the little screws here, which are too short. They don't actually come out enough to thread in. So we really don't have any fasteners for that piece. No idea what we're supposed to fasten that with. We'll figure that out after, but that's an afterthought because first thing we have to do is bolt this fuselage on. So we've got our 5 large bolts and washers all put together. Of course, we're using Loctite on these items. So basically all we have to do for that is get the fuselage in place, stuff all this stuff in there, and from the front section bolt it to the threads on the back. So your hidden washer or hidden nut, blind nut, is on this side and you thread in this way. So let's put this fuselage on. And that's pretty much it, guys. Nice and simple. Still got all those bolts to do up, but I won't bore you with me threading in bolts. All right, guys. So if you look at the A10, it looks very, very different at this point. So yes, the tail is off. That's an obvious thing, but we've got the system installed from Random RC. So the owner of the F-18, Steve, that I built, he actually found these mounts and stuff from Random RC, and basically Steve set them up on the F-18. So I haven't really had much experience with them. This is my first experience with them, and I haven't ordered any for my aircraft yet, but I'm actually, after using them now, really, really excited to give these things a try. They may not look like they're very stable, but I tell you, once you get them set up, that plane is going absolutely nowhere. There are so many different ways that you can set this thing up. You can get attachments that go on this little track. That's what these things are right here. So anyways, Random RC, if you guys are interested in this stuff, right there, it's all made in the USA, and they're not a channel sponsor or anything like that. I think it's great quality stuff, and it's kind of nice to see stuff like this made local. The options are endless. Like when you look on the website, there's from everything from a prop plane, tail draggers, A10s, everything. They've got a solution how to carry it. And I mean, this whole system is crazy strong. So basically you've got this front mount here, the back mount here like this, and you've got the middle ones right here. So we've put one on each side. And once you put these middle ones in and tighten down the bolts and everything, it is just rock solid. And then these Velcro straps here, there's lots of different ways to attach these, but we've just put the double-sided Velcro that they include on the mount, and nice stretchy neoprene straps, and that's not going anywhere. So the reason we had to do this was because in order to continue with putting the plane together, so these fin things right here, we needed to have the A10 lifted off the ground, right? So otherwise we can't put any of that stuff on the bottom of the fuselage. So now that this is done, we can continue putting things together. Okay guys, so now that we've got everything mounted on the stand, I bolted these fins on. They're pretty easy. They're just a metric bolt from the back side, and there are metal pieces in here like blind nuts, so there is something to fasten into. It's not just wood, so we use Loctite on there because later on we don't want to have to get in through here and tighten them up. So next thing we're going to do is start working our way forward. So we're going to be putting the air tanks in that middle kind of section right there because it's not really accessible for much of anything, and that'll make sure that they're out of the way. So I think the way we're going to set this up is we're going to have 3 tanks for the gear and the gear doors, and then we're going to have 1 tank running the brakes and the canopy, the operating canopy. So the reason I'm doing that is because then we've got lots of air volume for the gear, and this should be plenty suitable for the brakes and the canopy system. So that's, I think, how we're going to break these things out. So we just need to get this all kind of plumbed and put into that spot. I am just going to use silicone to fasten these down. So if we ever do need to get them out, we can just cut the silicone and they'll pop out. All right, guys, so we're doing a couple things here, kind of just preparation for the end of the evening. So basically what we're doing is we've got to reinforce this top hatch. They didn't put enough material in there, or fiberglass or whatever, so it is extremely soft and the paint is all chipped because of that. So I'm going to use some thick, heavy starched fiberglass. So just because it doesn't have to have much of an angle to it, we want to make it nice and strong on one pass of this material. So I've mixed up some 30-minute epoxy and thinned it out with some alcohol, and we're just going to paint this on and lay down our fiberglass. Now they've laid a whole bunch of extra epoxy on this this hatch, but it definitely didn't act like it normally would and stiffen up. It's very, very flexible. So I'm being quite generous on this because we need the stiffness so the paint doesn't crack. So we've put a nice layer over that. Now we'll lay our cloth in. And we'll put a nice layer over top of it as well to impregnate the cloth, and that will make it nice and stiff. And there we go. So if we were worried about weight on this, we could take a paper towel and soak up a lot of the epoxy, but we're not worried about weight on that at all. And what we're trying to do is basically stiffen this thing up so we don't get all the paint cracking like what has happened here on the original kit. So when that's nice and stiff, then we can sand this all down, wire brush it down, and try and get rid of the loose paint. And then we're gonna have to repaint that hatch. So I'm going to set that aside and let it cure. All right, so next thing we're going to work on here is getting those air tanks fastened as well, because this is the end of the evening and we want to let things cure till tomorrow. So we've got those tanks all laid out, and you can see the 3 on the left. They are basically all going to be joined together, as I mentioned, for the gear system, and the one on the right by itself is going to run the brakes and the canopy. So we are going to glue those in place with some silicone. Just put a couple dabs at the front and a couple dabs kind of close to the back there probably, and that'll keep them in place, and then we can connect those lines up tomorrow. Alright, so it's the next day and our air tanks are all nice and solid. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook the lines up to the air tank. So one of the fill lines coming from the valves where we've put air in it is going to come to this guy right here. We're going to join these 2 systems right there, and then this line right there is going to feed our air system. And then our other one, we've got a 3-way connector down here. So one side's going to go to the air line coming from the fill valve, the other one's going to feed our system of canopy and brakes. Alright, so there's our initial layout on the air board. fit everything on there nice and tidy. Our airlines basically line up with where they are going to go into the air system. So the brakes and canopy is going to go in over here, and the main air system for the gear goes in right in this area right there. So what I'm doing now is on these particular lines, I am going to shorten these wires for the Jetronic valves. So we're basically just running these, and we're going to shorten them so they're nice and short and the right length going into the Xicoy Sequencer. If you watched the last F-18 build or assembly of the Tiger Meat scheme, we didn't shorten any of these. These ones we are going to shorten them. So we're just making it nice and clean and running them in the servo wire keepers here and making it a perfect fit. Alright, so we haven't put that plate in place yet, but that is, I think, where we're going to put it. So we've got a decent amount of room kind of on the front portion of the plate, the back portion of the plate. So what that'll allow us to do is our big wire bundles here that are going to come to probably this area when they come to the receiver setup. We can run all that stuff underneath the air plate. If that's what we're going to call that from now on, is just the air plate. And that'll all be covered up, unfortunately, even though it looks really nice, but we'll cover it with that plate right there, and it's all just going to work fine and dandy. So, but that's what we are going to do. So we're going to glue that in place now. Once this is glued in place, then we'll hook our lines up tomorrow when everything's nice and solid. Alright guys, so next day, now that this plate is glued in place, it is nice and solid, so we're going to hook up the supply lines to the air system, and then we will take a look at the air lines themselves coming from the rear of the plane, and we will get those figured out. And then we've also got the air lines from the front door, the canopy lock here, and things like that. So we've got all that to figure out, and it's probably a decent time to reinstall the front landing gear, and then we can run all these airlines and get it finished. Alright, so quick shot of progress so far. I'm going to use bent screwdriver here. Thank you, bent screwdriver. So we've got the line hooked up there. We've got the line hooked up there. The green and yellow lines right there, that's for the canopy unlock. And then our canopy actuator is going to be this one right here. The white and gray lines, that is for our gear door and our locks right there. That's for our gear door front and our locks on the mains. And then you can see the white and the gray lines go forward, and they join up with the green and yellow lines of the front door. So as I was talking about with the red on these Jetronic valves, so you'll see that the red is this side here. So our gray line, which is our unlock at the back and our gear door open at the front, that's our down position, or our normal position, I guess, if you want to call it that. I talk about the Jetronic valves all the time. They're great, but one of the downsides with them is they do like to start in the red mode, so that one particular side. So if you set it up backwards, it's just a pain in the butt. So if you're ever having a problem with your Jetronic valves, that is probably your problem, and just make sure that you've got the gear down condition, door open condition on the red side. Alright, so next thing we're going to do before we go any further on the air system is we are going to install the front gear again. We took this out just to put the servo in and make sure everything was Loctited, so that is done, and we are going to bolt that in the aircraft. Pretty straightforward. Line it up, bolt it down, use Loctite. Alright guys, so gear is installed, and that went in pretty easy. Ran the servo line there. You can see it going into the button right there. So that's probably the best place to put it that I can think of, because it doesn't, the line as the gear comes up doesn't interfere with everything, so it works really well. And then we've just got the air lines coming back for the front gear, and those will go into that solenoid right there. Alright, so organizing the plane like this, I don't think it's something that you can really be taught or study on or anything like that. I think it just comes with time, but when I do something like this, I'm just trying to keep things as straightforward as possible, as serviceable as possible, neat and clean, nice big loops on airlines, stuff like that. And you're trying to eliminate things that pinch, right? You don't want your servo lines to pinch. You don't want your airlines to pinch when things are moving, because that's going to create problems down the road. One thing that makes organizing much more simple is to have all of those organizing clips and ends. Like the airline holders there, the single button holder that I've used on the servo line for the nose gear. All of those things are available on my website. I know people have 3D printers and they're really easy to print. It does make things much more simple when you have all that stuff to organize things. Alright guys, so next thing we're going to do is just do some test runs of the entire system here. So I've got the receiver plugged in, and I've got the gear controller, the Xicoy gear controller, plugged in to the receiver. And right now the gear is in the down position, so we've got all the reds on. Now if I go gear up, you'll see the bottom two go to green. So that's gear up. And then after a little bit of time here, the doors close and everything locks. Now if I go back to the gear down signal right now, doors open and gear comes down. So the gear system works. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on the canopy lock. So we're going to use the sequencer inside the radio. So I'm going to get those plugged in next. And we've also got the brake to plug in and check as well too. That's pretty straightforward. So once I get the canopy locks put in place, then I'll be able to use the sequencer in the radio to sort that stuff out. So we've got our channel layout here, which was all decided previously when we first set this up. So we've got canopy lock is in receiver number 9, and we've got canopy close is in receiver number 10. So 9's a lock, 10 is the close. Alright guys, and actually to keep things simple, I'm just using the servo speed function here in the 28X. So basically our lock is number 9, our open and close is number 10. So one direction I've got the lock opening right away, and then the actual open of the canopy going slow so it doesn't switch over till later, and then on the close it's vice versa. So I'll show you guys here. So this one is the lock, that one is the opening and closing mechanism. So right now the canopy is in the close position, and we'll go open, so the lock's going to initiate right away, and then the canopy is opening. Now we're going to go the other way and close it, so the canopy is going to work right away this time, and then the lock's going to work 4 seconds later. So canopy and lock closes. Alright guys, well, this may be fairly uninteresting at this point, but we have all the air system plugged in, it all tests well, and it all seems to be working just fine. The last thing I've put in here is that brake valve, low loss brake valve, which is in the middle of the screen, and works good. We got green light, brake off, and it's on a slider. You can see it adding air, get to the halfway point and it's full brake, and brake off. So that works good. So now that we know that the air system is working correctly in all aspects and directions, we can now do any of the final touches to the air system, which basically means that we just need to get the canopy open and close lines run. The actual air valve itself, or cylinder, actuating cylinder, is this one, and it gets mounted on that wooden plate above the air valves with this thing here, which is going to screw into place. So all this is going to get added on afterwards, but we just need to have our lines run so it can get plugged into these items. So now with all this stuff done, we can start to focus on getting our servo lines probably run underneath the air plate, and we can start prepping for the install of the main gear plate with the bubble traps and kind of figuring out where the other stuff is going to go. Alright, so we're going to mount the air actuator holder onto the front plate here. It's not super critical where it goes because it's basically the action is straight up and down almost with the canopy. So just looking at past A10s, you're kind of splitting the difference between the front edge of the tray and kind of where the UATs are. So we're going to mount that right there. I've just got my ruler laid out, so we're 214 millimeters. So the center of this holder goes at 107 millimeters. I'm just going to glue that down and then I'll put a couple screws through it. So that has been mounted, painted, it's still wet, you can see there. So because we're using the high flow UATs, these are designed for 8mm Festo, 8mm Festo, and then we've got our fill line, which is right there. So we're not using 8mm Festo on this plane because they're only 140 series engines. So what we got to do is the MAP air tanks actually come with these fittings, or one fitting per tank, and that's actually for to step it down right before the fuel pump. So generally, your fuel pump would be mounted here. You'd have an 8mm tubing coming whatever length mounting onto here. But what we're going to do is we're just going to mount these guys as close as we can get them like this with 8mm tubing. So one there and then here, because the lines going from this nipple to our actual fuel tank are 6mm Festo, and then our input side of our pumps, which will probably be mounted in this area, are also 6mm Festo. So I'm just going to get these mounted on, nothing overly exciting, and then that portion of the fuel system will be done. All right, guys, it is tip time. I'm going to show you a little secret. Some people still ask about this. I thought it was a pretty well-known fact, but let me show you. Okay, so generally on smaller turbines, you're going to have a 4mm input, 4mm output on the fuel pumps. So I've already done it to this fuel pump. I'll show you what we're going to do on this one here. So you take the fuel pump. Now the SWIWIN pumps have 4 nipples here, 2 inputs, 2 outputs. This is a very cool feature. I'll talk about it after, but basically you've got the arrow on the pump right there. So this is going to be our input side. Well, our input side is 6mm Festo and this nipple is 4mm Festo. So all you do is take your 4mm Festo line, put it over top of the nipple like that. Then you take an X-Acto blade like this, and you just cut it off nice and flush there with the edge of that nipple, like that. And then now a 6mm Festo line actually fits right over top of that. It's really important to safety wire that connection, but that's how you go from the 6mm Festo line onto the 4mm nipple. So you've got the input right there with our Festo on top of it. Then it comes out one of these lines. Would be this one here. Goes like this, back into the pump, and then out the outputs. So the benefit of this is any of the air bubbles that may get into the fuel system, they get chewed up by the fuel pump, and it really doesn't affect these engines at all. And obviously the smaller that air bubble, the less effect it's going to have on the engine and stopping the engine. Now they do have the restart feature as well too, but I've tested a bunch of these smaller engines with this pump, and it is phenomenal how hard it is to get those engines to quit just by restricting fuel or by adding air bubbles. So really, really cool feature of this pump, but hopefully you got something out of that tip time. All right, so both of the pumps have been set up here. Unfortunately, this distance is a little bit too short, and the UAT is sitting too high at an angle for this to actually come as a straight line. So we just put a loop in there. It's fairly tight. We might have been able to get it a bit tighter, but I don't want to risk this this kinking. So anyways, that portion is done. Now we just need to figure out our layout for our receiver and some of our other items that need to fit on this plate, like our iGyro and things like that. So just gonna work on this and kind of figure out layout. So at this point, guys, what I'll do is I will get everything ready, pre-made, to install this tray. Now what I mean by that is we need these power leads as an example. So I did up 2 3-foot power leads that are going to connect to the Dean's outputs on the box, the JR box. And these will go to the front, and then we'll put our battery leads on after we figure out how much weight we need in batteries. So this kind of stuff needs to run to the front. Basically, we need to get everything run to the front that we need. So some other things to think about with the Xicoy controller there. We want to be able to plug into the controller and make any adjustments, but we don't want to have to take this all apart. So I'm going to run another servo lead with a female end to the front here, so we can put it somewhere in the front so we can plug in the controller and make any adjustments. Same thing goes with the Box IGYRO that we're going to install right here. We want to have that lead for the updates and everything go towards the front. And then we have our on-off switch for our soft switch for the 16 BPX Pro. Again, we want to have that run to the front. So basically you need to get all that stuff organized before we put this tray in. Otherwise you're trying to fish all that stuff through afterwards. Alright guys, and that is everything for this particular A10 video. I think there's going to be one more video left in the series, other than the weathering. We're going to do the weathering as separate videos when we do that. But I think that is going to be it for the A10. So what do we have left to do? We've basically got organizing the front end. We've got to check over the systems. We've got to check our C of G and get that all set up. And then the last thing to do is to set up or fire up the engines and confirm all our programming is good to go. So the A10 is very, very close to being running and ready to go. So thank you guys so much for tuning into the video series. Do appreciate it. And I believe that the Huracan build is going to start very, very soon. So keep an eye out for that. If you guys have any questions or comments, list them down below. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up. If you have not done so already, hit that subscribe button down below. It is free to do so. And thank you guys for watching the videos. I appreciate all the support for the channel and the kind words and comments and all that stuff. So thank you guys, and we'll see you in the next video.